I used to believe that my family was my entire world. A small but complete world where I had my parents and peaceful days. I thought happiness was forever. But if someone had told me that one day everything would change, that all I loved would become nothing more than memories, I would have scoffed and brushed it off. I didn't know that time never stands still, and that my perfect world was far more fragile than I had realized. My name is Claire Benson, born and raised in a small town in the Midwest. My family wasn't wealthy, but we had each other. My father, David Benson, was an accountant, a quiet man, but one who always found a way to make me laugh when he came home after a long day. My mother, Lisa Benson, was an elementary school teacher, someone who brought warmth and kindness wherever she went. I had a simple yet happy childhood. On weekends, our family would pile into our old Ford Explorer, setting off to explore endless roads. We never went far, sometimes just to a quiet lake or a small campsite. But to me they were always magical adventures. Dad loved playing old songs, singing along off-key, while Mom never hesitated to belt out the wrong lyrics. I would sit in the back seat, pretending to cover my ears and complain, but deep down I wouldn't have changed a thing. When we weren't on the road, we spent time at the local shopping mall. I would drag Mom through countless stores, trying on outfit after outfit, then dramatically turning them down. She was always the voice of reason, while Dad, he was my secret ally. Whenever Mom wasn't looking, he would slip a few dollar bills into my hand and whisper, "Don't tell your mother, princess." I always knew Mom figured it out, but she never scolded him, maybe because she enjoyed seeing me happy too. But my favorite moments were Friday nights. Pizza nights. We didn't have any special family traditions, but Fridays were always reserved just for us. We'd sprawl out on the living room floor, watching a movie that didn't really matter as long as we were together. Dad always tried to explain the plot, even when no one asked. Mom kept shushing him, and I focused on my pizza, not caring about anything except that moment. No homework, no worries, no responsibilities. Just the warmth of my family and the sound of our laughter filling the room. I used to believe that was happiness forever. But nothing lasts forever, does it? I don't know exactly when everything started to change. At first it was just little things. Mom seemed more tired after work or stared out the window longer than usual. I noticed she started taking more pills, those tiny white ones she kept hidden in the kitchen drawer. But when I asked, she simply smiled, gently ruffled my hair and said, "I'm just a little exhausted, sweetheart. Teachers are always busy." I believed her. Weekend trips became less frequent and then stopped altogether. The Ford Explorer still sat in the driveway, covered in dust, as if it, too, was waiting to be driven again. Pizza nights still happened, but instead of the three of us laughing and talking, it was just me and Dad, silently chewing our food while Mom went to bed early on the couch. Movies lost their charm without her teasing commentary. I don't know when I started dreading Friday nights. Then came the days when Mom disappeared for entire afternoons. Dad said she had to see the doctor, but I never understood why someone who was just a little exhausted needed to go to the hospital so often. Once, I stood outside my parents' bedroom, listening through the door. I heard Dad's voice, so quiet, so fragile, almost breaking. "Is there another way, doctor?" I never heard the response. As time passed, my mother grew noticeably thinner. Dad started coming home later, always carrying a quiet sadness on his face. Whenever I asked, he would just say everything was fine, but I could feel it. Something terrible was coming. And then, the day finally came. It was a Tuesday, but I don't remember the exact date. I only remember coming home, dropping my backpack on the floor as usual, and calling out, "Mom, I'm home!" No answer. The house was too quiet, eerily still. Then I heard something. The steady beeping of a machine upstairs. I ran up the stairs. The door to my parents' bedroom was slightly open. Mom lay there, her face pale beyond belief, her breathing so faint I could barely hear it. A man in a white coat stood beside her, his eyes filled with silent sympathy. Dad sat on the edge of the bed, gripping her hand, as if letting go would mean losing her forever. For the first time in my life, I saw my father cry. Mom is gone, Claire. The world collapsed around me. I don't remember how I reacted. I only remember the emptiness. The hollowness. As if someone had taken a part of my soul, without warning. I stood there, staring at her, waiting for her to open her eyes. Waiting for her to tell me this was all just some cruel joke. But she never opened her eyes again. The days that followed passed in a haze. Whispers filled the house, black clothes, sympathetic hugs from people whose names I didn't even remember. I didn't eat, didn't sleep, didn't talk. Every morning I would wake up and forget for a few seconds. Then reality would crash down on me again. Merciless, like a knife straight to the heart. Dad wasn't doing much better than I was. He seemed like a shadow of himself. Quiet, empty. We were like two people lost in the same storm, not knowing what to hold on to. I used to think my family was my whole world, but that world had just shattered. Right before my eyes. 6 months after Mom passed, I still hadn't gotten used to the silence in this house. Pizza nights were gone. The Ford Explorer still sat in the driveway, covered in dust. Just like our lives. Dad barely spoke to me, and I didn't know what to say to him. We were like strangers living under the same roof, each trapped in our own grief. Then, one day, Dad started coming home late. At first, I didn't think much of it. I assumed he was just burying himself in work to escape the pain of losing Mom. But then, late nights became the norm. And something changed. He wasn't coming home looking exhausted anymore. He started taking secret phone calls, reading messages with a small smile, and quickly putting his phone away whenever I walked into the room. I didn't think too much about it, until one evening, when Dad called me downstairs. I walked down the stairs and saw a woman sitting on the couch. She had golden blonde hair, sharp blue eyes, and a smile that I immediately disliked. Claire, I want you to meet Vanessa. That name stuck in my head like something inherently wrong. Vanessa. A stranger. Sitting on my mother's couch. In my house. Looking at me as if she belonged here. Hi Claire, your dad has told me so much about you, she said. Her voice sickeningly sweet. I didn't respond. I couldn't. Dad hesitated for a moment before speaking again. Vanessa and we met a few months ago. She's wonderful, and I think you should get to know her. Wonderful? Mom had only been gone for 6 months, and Dad was already calling another woman wonderful? It felt like someone had just punched me straight in the chest. But Dad didn't notice my shock. He didn't see my fists clenched so tightly that my nails nearly dug into my skin. He was smiling. For the first time in months, he was truly smiling. I hated that smile. Vanessa entered our lives like a storm, washing away everything that remained of my mother. She pretended to be gentle and caring whenever Dad was around, cooking dinner, inviting me to go shopping, even offering to help with my homework. But when it was just the two of us, her smile disappeared. Listen, kid, she whispered one day in the kitchen. I know you don't like me, and I don't care. But I'm here to stay, got it? Rage flared inside me. You can't replace my mother. She tilted her head, her eyes cold. I don't need to replace her. I just need you to disappear. I tried to tell Dad. I tried to warn him about Vanessa, about how she treated me when he wasn't around. But he wouldn't listen. He didn't want to listen. Claire, you need to accept this. No, Dad, she's not a good person. I've seen who she really is. Dad sighed, rubbing his temples as if I was nothing more than a headache. I know this has been a difficult time, but you can't keep resisting. Vanessa cares about you. Maybe you should try to open your heart. Open my heart? She wanted me gone. But no matter what I said, Dad refused to believe me. And then, as if to put an end to my protests once and for all, he made his final decision. Vanessa and I are getting married next month. The words hit me like a hammer. I could barely breathe. You'll be going to summer camp, Claire. I think it will help you adjust. I stared at him, hoping this was some kind of sick joke. But he wasn't laughing. He really wanted to send me away. To make sure I wasn't there on his wedding day. I wanted to scream, to break everything in sight. But I didn't. I just nodded. Fine. Because in that moment I realized something. Dad was no longer on my side. 3 months passed since I was sent to summer camp. I don't remember much about my time there. Only that I spent most of it counting down the days until I could go home. Even though I hated Vanessa, even though I didn't want to see my father marry her, I still longed to return. To my room. To whatever was left of Mom. But when I stepped through the doorway on that August afternoon, I knew I had made a mistake. The house wasn't the same. The pictures of Mom that once hung in the living room were gone. Her favorite armchair where she used to sit and read every night had vanished. In its place was a completely different space. Cold. Unfamiliar. Polished decorations. A sleek, expensive couch I had never seen before. A grand chandelier hanging from the ceiling. And Vanessa, standing in the center of it all, one hand resting on her stomach. Her stomach was visibly round. I froze. "Welcome home, Claire," she smiled, victory gleaming in her eyes. Dad stepped out from the kitchen, his face glowing as if this was the best news in the world. "Sweetheart, I have great news. You're going to be a big sister. Vanessa is pregnant." The shock hit me like a tidal wave. Mom had only been gone a year. I was still struggling to accept that she wasn't here anymore. And yet, Dad was already ready for a new family. A new child. Vanessa gently ran her hand over her stomach, her voice as sweet as honey. "We're really hoping you'll be happy about this, Claire. A fresh start for all of us." A fresh start. I said nothing. I couldn't. But the nightmare wasn't over yet. As I dragged my suitcase toward my room, Vanessa stepped in front of the door, blocking my way. "Oh, I almost forgot," she said lightly, as if discussing the weather. "Your room is now the baby's room." I stared at her, stunned. "What?" "We need space for the baby, and your room was the best option," Vanessa shrugged. "But don't worry. Your father has already arranged a new place for you." I turned to Dad, desperately hoping he would deny it. Hoping he would stand up for me. But he just stood there, avoiding my gaze. "You'll stay in the guest room, Claire. We didn't have any other choice." The guest room? I opened the door to my new room. A tiny, empty space with a single bed and a small dresser. My belongings had been stuffed into boxes, left unopened. It didn't feel like a bedroom. It felt like a temporary stay. Like I wasn't a part of this family anymore. In the days that followed, Vanessa began drawing invisible boundaries. Every time I asked Dad about Mom's belongings, Vanessa would sweetly remark that some things just don't fit the new house anymore. Every time I tried to join a conversation about the baby, she would laugh lightly and tell me I was too young to understand grown-up matters. Gradually, I wasn't allowed to be around Dad for too long. But the part that hurt the most was my little brother. The baby I had never even met yet. But had already been stripped of my right to be his sister. Vanessa made my presence unwanted. Dad had a new family, a new life. And I was nothing more than an extra piece in their perfect picture. I used to count down the days until I could come home. But now all I wanted was to leave as soon as possible. I learned how to disappear. I woke up earlier, stayed out later, avoided family meals where Vanessa controlled the conversation and Dad only nodded in agreement. Every time I tried to talk to him, Vanessa found a way to cut in, making me feel like an outsider in my own home. But I had a plan. I focused on school. I knew that graduating high school was my only ticket out. I buried myself in homework, joined extracurricular activities, and did everything I could to secure a spot in a good university. Vanessa, of course, wasn't happy about that. "Do you think you're special?" she sneered at me once when we were alone in the kitchen. "College isn't for ungrateful little brats. After high school, you should get a real job and start contributing to this family." "This family?" I almost laughed. But I didn't respond. I just gripped my book tighter, telling myself I couldn't let her see me waver. Then, one day, the argument finally happened. I remember that night clearly. I was sitting in the living room, working on my homework, when Vanessa suddenly walked in and threw a stack of papers onto the table. "Your father and I have talked. We can't afford to send you to college, so you'll need to start working right after graduation." I froze. "What? Your father agrees with this?" she continued, crossing her arms, a smug look in her eyes. "He said the family's savings will go toward more important things. You need to be realistic, Claire." I don't know what made me do it. Maybe the anger that had been building up for years. Maybe the desperation of knowing I was about to lose my only way out. But I shot up from my seat, locking eyes with her. "What savings? The money my mother left for me?" Vanessa stiffened. She hadn't expected me to know about it. I turned to Dad, who had just walked into the room, his face full of unease. "Dad, is it true? Did Mom save money for my college?" Dad sighed, rubbing his forehead. "Claire, I think we need to reconsider." "You promised," I cut him off, my voice shaking. "You promised Mom." Dad looked down. I didn't know if it was because he felt guilty, or because he couldn't handle Vanessa's furious glare burning into him. But then, after a long, suffocating silence, he spoke. "Claire is going to college." I could feel Vanessa's rage simmering beneath the surface, but she didn't say anything. She couldn't. I had won. The day I received my acceptance letter from a university in New York, I sat alone in my room, staring at the envelope, not knowing whether to cry or smile. I had done it. I was getting out of here. But as I packed my suitcase, I couldn't shake the bitter feeling in my chest. I wanted to be happy. I wanted to feel relieved. But all I felt was a strange emptiness. Dad helped me load my luggage into the trunk the day I left. Vanessa didn't even bother saying goodbye. I didn't care. But right before I got into my car, Dad pulled me into a tight hug. "I'm proud of you, Claire," he said, his voice hoarse. "Your mother would be too." I wanted to believe that, I really did. But when I looked at him, all I saw was a man who had lost himself a long time ago. And as I drove away from that house, I made myself a promise. I would never come back. I used to think that once I left that house, I would immediately feel free. But the truth wasn't that simple. The first few days in New York were both exciting and lonely. The city was too big, too loud, and I didn't know anyone. I threw myself into my studies, trying to adapt to my new life. No one here knew about my past, about Vanessa or my father, and I liked it that way. I rarely went home. No one in my family really expected me to. Dad barely called, and whenever I tried to reach out, Vanessa was always the one to answer. She still had that same sickeningly sweet tone, but I wasn't naive enough to believe it anymore. Every conversation ended in quiet tension. Eventually, I stopped trying. Dad and Vanessa didn't come to my college graduation. I waited until the last minute, even saving 2 seats for them in the audience. But they remained empty. Instead, on the morning of my graduation, a short text appeared on my phone. "Congratulations, Claire, I'm proud of you." That was it. No call, no apology. I wasn't sure if I felt disappointed. Because maybe, deep down, I had stopped expecting anything from Dad a long time ago. But even though they weren't there, I wasn't alone that day. My grandmother, my mother's mother, sat in the front row, clapping proudly as I walked across the stage to receive my diploma. She was the one person who had never abandoned me. After the ceremony, as we had dinner at a small cozy restaurant, she took my hand, her eyes filled with warmth. "Your mother always believed you could do it, Claire, and so do I." I tried not to cry, but in that moment, I realized, this was my family. Not the people who had cast me aside. After graduation, I decided to stay in New York. I didn't want to return to my hometown. I didn't want to face Vanessa. To see the house that used to be mine, but no longer belonged to me. I wanted to build a life of my own. I found my passion in media and advertising, a world where I could use both creativity and strategy to create something meaningful. I worked hard, climbing my way up from an intern to a stable position at a well-known advertising agency. Life fell into place, and for the first time in my life, I truly felt free. But even as the distance between me and my family grew, there was one thing I could never quite let go of. My little brother. I didn't know much about Ethan, the baby Vanessa had given birth to. When I left, he was only a few months old. I never got the chance to be his sister. Occasionally, when I called Dad, I tried to ask about Ethan. But Dad's responses were always short and dismissive. He's doing well, he's healthy. Vanessa never let me have a chance to connect with him. Still, I couldn't stop wondering. Did he even know I existed? Had he ever asked about me? Maybe one day, I would have answers. But for now, I had a life to build. And I wasn't going to let the past pull me down one more time. I hadn't heard from Dad in nearly 3 years. My life in New York was stable. I had a good job, a small but cozy apartment, and no one ever mentioned Vanessa or the past I had worked so hard to leave behind. But then, on a Saturday night, my phone rang. Dad's number. I stared at the screen for a few seconds, my hands slightly trembling. Finally, I took a deep breath and answered. Claire, it's Dad. His voice sounded distant, exhausted, as if he had been carrying something too heavy for far too long. We just bought a new house, he continued. I was hoping maybe you could come help with the move. It might be a good chance for us to reconnect. I hesitated. Why now? Why, after all these years, did he suddenly want me to come back? But when he mentioned Ethan, I knew I couldn't say no. He talks about you all the time, Claire. He wants to meet you. Ethan? He really knows I exist? Maybe this was my only chance to meet my little brother. I agreed. 2 weeks later, I drove back to my hometown. Dad and Vanessa's new house was nothing like the one I had grown up in. It was bigger, fancier, but completely soulless. I stepped inside, anxiety twisting in my stomach. Vanessa greeted me at the door, her fake smile unchanged. Claire, what a surprise to see you. I glanced around. Ethan wasn't there. Where's Ethan? I asked immediately. Vanessa gave a small, amused smile and replied slowly. Oh, such a shame. We thought moving might be too distracting for him, so we sent him to my parents' house for the weekend. A cold chill ran down my spine. She had done this on purpose. Dad stood there, looking away. He knew, and he hadn't stopped her. I clenched my fists, swallowing the anger rising in my throat. Fine, I'll help with the move then. Nothing could have prepared me for what happened next. As I walked into the storage room, I saw a sealed cardboard box. On the outside, scrawled in marker, were the words, "Old things, throw away." I opened it, and my heart clenched. No. Photos of my mother. The books she used to read. The necklace she wore every day. All of it had been shoved carelessly into the box, like trash. My hands trembled as I picked up a photo. Mom, holding me as a baby, her face glowing with happiness. I walked into the living room, gripping the picture tightly. I held it up in front of Vanessa. What is this? My voice was cold, sharp. She barely glanced at it before shrugging. Oh, those things don't really fit in the new house anymore. Everything needs to change, Claire. It's only natural. It felt like a knife straight to my heart. Don't fit? I repeated, each word slow, controlled, as I fought back the storm of emotions threatening to explode. This is my mother. This is her life. She is not some old thing to be thrown away. Vanessa chuckled softly, her voice dripping with condescension. Don't be so dramatic, Claire. The past is the past. Do you really think your father wants to look at these things every day? Seeing them just makes it harder for him to move on. Maybe it's time you forget about your mother. My fingers tightened around the photo until my knuckles turned white. I turned to Dad, hoping, desperately, that he would say something, that he would protest, that he would stand up for me. But he just stood there, silent. I had waited for this moment for so long. for him to realize his mistake. For him to fight for me, for my mother, for everything we once had. But he did nothing. I couldn't take it anymore. Without a word, I turned around, gathering every single one of Mom's belongings and loading them into my car. No one stopped me. No one said a word. As I shut the trunk, I stood there for a long moment, staring at the house that was supposed to be home. Dad stood on the doorstep, his expression filled with hesitation, with guilt. But he didn't move. I had nothing left to say to him. I got into my car and started the engine. But just as I was about to drive away, my eyes drifted to the second-floor window. Ethan. He stood there, his wide blue eyes staring down at me. He knew who I was. He was watching me leave. And in that moment, I realized I couldn't abandon him the way Dad had abandoned me. I had to come back. But not now, not while Vanessa was still in control. I would wait. And one day I would take my little brother with me. I thought that leaving that house for the last time would be the end of it all. But I was wrong. 2 weeks later my phone rang again. I had planned to ignore it, but something inside me still hadn't fully let go. I took a deep breath and answered. Claire, I need to talk to you. His voice held a hint of hesitation, but then he continued. Vanessa and I are hosting a housewarming party next week. Family, friends. We want you to come. So people can see that our family is still strong. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. You want me there, for what? I let out a dry laugh. To be part of your perfect little show? Dad sighed. Claire, you're my daughter. I want you to be part of this family. This family? The one I had been pushed out of? I let out a bitter chuckle, but still agreed. Fine, Dad. I'll come. But Vanessa always had her own way of manipulating everything. 3 days before the party, I got a text from a relative. Claire, are you coming to the housewarming party? I heard it's tonight. I froze. Tonight? I immediately called Dad, but he didn't answer. I knew exactly what was happening. Vanessa had changed the date on purpose. She wanted to make sure I wasn't there. So I wouldn't show up. So I couldn't challenge whatever story she planned to tell about me. But she had forgotten one thing. I was no longer a child she could control. I scrolled through my contacts and dialed the number for the high-end restaurant they had ordered catering from. Hello, this is Claire Benson. I'm calling to confirm the catering order for tonight's party. The friendly manager responded. Yes, the Benson family's order. It's scheduled for delivery in 2 hours. I smirked. Actually, there's been a slight change. I'd like to cancel the order. A brief moment of confused silence. Are you sure? The order has already been paid for. Absolutely sure. I hung up, a satisfaction spreading through me. That evening, a relative of mine live-streamed from the party. I sat on my couch, sipping a glass of wine, watching silently. They had set up everything to look like a perfect event. Twinkling lights, elegantly dressed guests. But there was one problem. No food. I chuckled to myself as I watched Vanessa struggle to keep her composure, awkwardly reassuring everyone that the food will be here any minute. But as time passed, unease spread through the crowd. Then suddenly, a voice from off-camera asked, Where's Claire? I thought she was coming too. I sat up straighter, paying closer attention. Vanessa flashed a soft smile. The same, fake, practiced smile I knew too well. Oh, Claire. She sighed, shaking her head with an exaggerated look of sympathy. She's always been like this. She's not very social. She has some emotional issues, so we didn't want to pressure her. She said it so sweetly, so full of pity, as if I were some troubled, wayward child. Her words cut like a knife to my pride. Vanessa had done this on purpose. She wasn't just trying to push me out of the family. She wanted to destroy my image completely. I couldn't stay silent anymore. I dialed my father's number. The phone rang, and as he put it on speaker, the entire party fell silent. Claire? Why are you calling right now? I didn't hesitate. Dad? Is the party going well? Or is everyone too busy waiting for the food? I heard Vanessa's sharp inhale. Claire, what did you do? I let out a cold laugh. Nothing at all. It's just that if I wasn't invited, then the catering order wasn't necessary, right? Murmurs spread through the room. Vanessa was losing control. You selfish brat, Claire. You always want to ruin everything for me. Me? I repeated slowly. Thank you for finally showing everyone who you really are. The energy in the room shifted. I saw guests subtly set down their drinks, whispering to each other. Vanessa had made a mistake. I continued, my voice calm but firm. Dad, I'm exhausted. I've tried so hard to hold on to something that clearly doesn't exist anymore. You chose Vanessa a long time ago. And I'm choosing to walk away from this game. A deafening silence. Vanessa was no longer smiling. And for the first time in years, my father had nothing to say. I took a deep breath. Goodbye, Dad. And then I ended the call. There was nothing but a deep sense of peace within me. I had cut ties with the past. Vanessa could keep controlling my father, but she would never control me again. 4 months after the housewarming party, my father showed up at my door. I was getting ready to go out when I heard a knock. When I opened it, I froze. Dad stood there. Thinner, older, with a weariness in his eyes that I had never seen before. Claire. His voice was hoarse, as if he had practiced for a long time just to say my name. I didn't know how to react. 4 months. I hadn't spoken to him in 4 months, no calls, no updates about Vanessa. I thought he would never show up again. But he was standing here, right in front of me. Can we talk? I hesitated but finally stepped aside, letting him in. Dad looked around my apartment, as if trying to imagine the life I had built without him. A life where he no longer existed. Are you doing well? He asked. His voice so quiet I almost didn't hear it. Better than ever, I answered, not bothering to hide my coldness. Dad nodded, then let out a long sigh, as if he was gathering the courage to say something important. I was wrong. I went completely still. I never expected to hear those words come out of his mouth. I was wrong to let Vanessa control everything. I was wrong to push you away. I hurt you. And I know that. I clenched my fists, a flood of emotions crashing over me. Why now? My voice wavered slightly. Why did it take you this long to realize? Dad looked down at his hands, as if he didn't know the answer himself. Then he said, I lost you. And I don't want to lose Ethan the same way. I took a sharp breath. Ethan. Hearing my little brother's name felt like a knife cutting through an old wound. Where's Vanessa? I asked, half expecting, half dreading the answer. Dad let out a bitter chuckle. She's been cut off by the family. Friends stopped trusting her after what happened at the party. I felt a slight sense of relief. Not because I wanted revenge, but because, finally, the truth had caught up with her. He wants to see you, Dad continued. He asks about you every day. He doesn't understand why you're not there. My chest tightened. For my entire life I had believed I was unwanted, pushed out of the family. But Ethan was different. He had never even had the chance to know me, yet he still wanted to find me. I couldn't say no to that. 3 weeks later, I saw Ethan again. I chose a small cafe in my old town, a place that didn't hold too many painful memories for me. I arrived early, my heart pounding. Then Dad walked in, holding the hand of a little boy. About 8 years old. Ethan. My little brother looked like Dad, but his deep blue eyes belonged to Mom. I felt a lump in my throat. Ethan stared at me for a long moment. Then suddenly, his face broke into the widest smile. Claire. I frowned. I hadn't expected him to call me that. I hadn't expected him to already know who I was. Before I could react, he ran to me and wrapped his arms around me in a tight hug. I never thought I would cry that day. But I did. From that day on, things began to change. Dad and I weren't completely healed, but we started seeing each other more. Ethan became the bridge between us. He told me about school, about his mischief, about the times he had asked about me but never got answers. Dad listened silently, not interrupting. One day, as I was about to leave, Dad suddenly called out to me, "Claire." I turned around. "Thank you." I nodded. There was nothing else that needed to be said. I returned to New York feeling lighter than I ever had. Vanessa no longer controlled my life. Dad was trying to fix his mistakes. And most importantly, I was no longer alone. Ethan needed me. And I would never abandon him the way I had been abandoned. For the first time in years, I felt truly strong. I had built a life of my own, a bright future. But I had also found back a part of my family. And that mattered more than anything else. The story of Claire Benson. Claire Benson's journey is not just about escaping control, it's about finding herself again. Once cast aside by her family, she rose above it all, built her own life, and healed from past wounds. But life is not always about cutting ties, it's sometimes about giving second chances. Even after being abandoned by her father, Claire chose to open her heart again. Not for the past, but for the future. For Ethan, the little brother she could never turn her back on. Her story is a reminder that true strength lies in our choices, whether to walk away or to go back and make a difference. Claire Benson's story is an emotional journey of pain, resilience, and redemption. What do you think of Claire's decision? If you were in her shoes, would you forgive her father? Leave your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to follow the channel for more heartfelt stories about family and life.